So there's really a lot to talk about for the past week. Um, I think the number one thing on my mind is that we're just being barraged by ridiculous things. First of all, it is ridiculous to suggest that a person who, for 3 decades of their, should I say, career, 3 decades, has engaged in misinformation, disinformation, and harm to others. That person is RFK Jr. He is not to be trusted. He never was. The people that actually thought he was a viable candidate for president, they were going to vote for him at a protest because they neither liked the Democratic choice or the Republican choice. Well, I got news for you. We only had two choices. And as awful as both of them were, because one represents more of the status quo and more corporatocracy and more of the same late and failing capitalistic viewpoints that have been harming us and robbing us blind for decades, that pales in comparison to the white Christian nationalist choice. It is very evident that no matter what Trump says or does, he has surrounded himself with people who will do what he says, but in return, he allows them to do whatever they want. And they're engaging in this reactionary Christian nationalist bunk. And that's what it is. It's bunk. None of it is true. We don't have millions and millions of people assaulting the beliefs and the way of life of Christians. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Most of us who don't ascribe to these pseudo-Christian, Christo-fascist, Talibangelistic viewpoints, we do so based on one word and one word only. We feel the empathy and the need to care about others. And because we feel empathy and the need to care about others, we oppose this idea that only the in-group of Christians matter. And I grew up as a Christian. I grew up as a Roman Catholic. And I'm fully aware of what the Christian point of view is, both from a political, twisted version to the actual Christian version that Catholics were taught to believe since they were children. Dare I say, indoctrinated. I'm fully aware. When I was a kid, I could attend Catholic school and still learn everything else and not have to worry about, are they also infusing a bunch of nonsense that contradicts the science and the math and the literature and the art and the history that I learned. Now it's overt. It's outright that is the goal of white Christian nationalism, including some Catholics who have bought into this idea that they've been under assault for decades, when really the culture war that was fought since the 1960s was lost by Christianity. It was lost. And it was lost to the fact that Christianity didn't evolve into what it should do, which is continuing to teach the empathy of Christ and not to teach the dogmatic approach of right and wrong, because there is no right and wrong anymore. Because Christians excuse horrific behavior in order to quote unquote win, and that's what's become evident. So here we are. That's problematic. Secondly, it's problematic to even have to talk about vaccines. Like, this is something that I've been doing for 2 decades. I've been giving vaccines to children for 2 decades. And the number of adverse reactions, because that's what they're really called. They're not called vaccine injuries. They're called adverse reactions. The number of adverse reactions that I have recorded and kept track of, I can count on one hand. There's only been a handful of patients that I've ever said, well, we're not going to give any more doses of that medication because you had a terrible reaction to it. Now, what is a medicine that I've seen a lot of reactions to? Antibiotics. And yes, they're life-saving because if somebody has a life-threatening bacterial infection, they have to take antibiotics. But by far and away, I've lost count of how many patients I've seen had adverse reactions, severe reactions to antibiotics or seizure medications. That would be the second most common to have a severe reaction. So let's keep things in perspective. There are mild and rare adverse reactions. So there doesn't need to be a grand relook at the reporting system. We're already looking at it. There needs to be a look at, how to use other ways to track and discover recurrent adverse reactions, ones that need to be the kind of warning to people like, well, we've noticed this adverse reaction is a little bit more common, and here's our thoughts on that. I don't have any problem with that. Then you get this whole idea of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, the most common form of antidepressant prescribed today, and the most successful, that they are addictive. They are not addictive. They make people feel better, and people like feeling better, so there's that. They do not cause children or adolescents or young adults to be violent. Young adults and children choose to be violent in situations of fear. So when we allow adverse childhood events to accumulate onto children, so that means bad things happening to kids while they were little or while they were young or teenagers, that is a cumulative effect, and it causes children to react in two ways. They run away or they fight. That is a good old-fashioned fight or flight response. And because of that, if we're seeing a child or a young adult act in a violent way, it is because their nervous system has been stressed beyond its capacity. It is not because they've been given a medication. I'm going to continue to prescribe medications. I'm going to continue to vaccinate children because it's incredibly safe, and it's much safer to treat mental illness with a known prescription medication that has been reviewed and reviewed and reviewed and analyzed and analyzed and analyzed. And yes, they have side effects, but the benefits outweigh the side effects. Not as tremendously as vaccines. The benefits with vaccines are so huge and the side effects are so rare, adverse reactions, not vaccine injuries, that it by far and away benefits not just the individual, but society. And that goes to my last point. Public health is more important than individual freedom. I'm sorry that you have to hear that, but it is true. Public health is so much more important than individual freedom, and that is because we either all work together or we all die sooner. That's as simple as public health can get. We either all participate in the system that helps us be healthy and happy, or we die a little bit younger and a little bit sooner, and we have less life to enjoy. So, 2 more points. We either trust experts or we trust our instincts. But the problem with instincts is instincts are animalistic reactions to outside stimuli, and they aren't always the correct way to see things. And the stimuli that you receive might be information and words that are not true. They may have a minuscule grain, a sand pebble of truth, but that's it. And then very lastly, this is where capitalism has failed us, is you either know that corporate ethics is an oxymoron, or you believe that there is corporate ethics. Corporations are piles of money that don't care about people. The fact that they are given personhood through the Constitution is ridiculous. And until the American people understand that a corporation does not have the best interest of the individual, we are never going to progress as a society. So, there we go.